Supergirl is doomed to fail. There are characters who fail once and disappear, and then there's Supergirl. Hollywood has spent over 40 years trying to turn her into a cinematic icon, but they can never quite pull it off. And we aren't exaggerating. There have been comics, toys, movies, and TV shows, all projects that either flopped or were straight up canceled. The names change, the eras change, but nothing ever seems to work out. So why does everything around this character fail? Is it part of the infamous Superman curse? And the question I have for you is, can this new Supergirl movie finally change history? To understand why the new movie is in trouble, we need to take a trip back in time and look at all the previous versions. We're in for a roller coaster of shattered dreams, red tape, controversy, and completely baffling decisions. If you like this video, please share it with a friend. For some reason, there are times when our videos get fewer than 1,000 views, and it makes it really difficult to maintain our usual level of quality. When you like, subscribe, and share the video, you are helping us keep the channel alive. It all started in 1978. Supergirl's first flight on the big screen promised to define an era, but it ended up being the first major warning sign that something was off with the character. With the release of Superman the movie, a new era began in Hollywood. On top of being a massive success, it was the Man of Steel's first movie, the first real comic book adaptation, and it helped define the very concept of a blockbuster. To put things in perspective, if it weren't for that movie, we wouldn't have the Batman franchises or the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe today. Knowing they had struck a gold mine, the executives at Warner Brothers quickly put together a sequel, Superman 2. Despite behind-the-scenes drama and a change in directors, it was another hit, and the studio started thinking about a third installment. But trouble wasn't far behind. Sensing that the formula was starting to wear thin, producers Alexander and Ilya Salkind decided to freshen up Superman 3 by introducing Kara Zor-El, Superman's cousin. Supergirl had a strong fan base in the comics, and she also represented something Hollywood hadn't fully tapped into yet, a strong female character who could attract a young female audience. They loved the idea so much that they decided to pull her from Superman 3 and give her a standalone movie instead. Supergirl wasn't just going to expand the Superman universe, she also had the potential to become the very first major female superhero on the big screen. Warner Brothers saw the project as a massive cultural event, comparable to the impact the Man of Steel had. The story was set to begin with Kara in Argo City, a Kryptonian community that survived the destruction of the planet. She's living a quiet life with her family, right up until her mistake leads to the loss of the Omega Hedron, a powerful energy source that Argo needs to survive. So she travels to Earth to recover the artifact, which has fallen into the hands of Selina, a witch who serves as the villain of the story. When it came to casting Supergirl, the Salkinds initially thought of Brooke Shields, one of the biggest young stars of the era. However, they eventually decided to repeat the exact same strategy they used with Christopher Reeve for Superman and look for an unknown. They auditioned future celebrities like Demi Moore and Melanie Griffith, until Helen Slater walked in. She was just 18 years old and fresh out of high school, but they immediately realized she had the perfect innocence and presence to bring the superhero to life. Warner Brothers was completely convinced the role would turn her into an instant star, just like Superman did for Reeve, so they locked her into a multi-picture contract. And following the blueprint of Superman the movie, the production surrounded her with established Hollywood veterans, Peter O'Toole and Faye Dunaway to play Selina. The first Supergirl movie promised to be another hit, until the curse started to rear its head. Originally, Superman was supposed to show up at the beginning of the film to introduce Kara, but Reeve refused to be a part of it. Officially, he said he wasn't comfortable with the project, though word later got out that financial negotiations had fallen apart. Superman's absence forced them to rewrite the script and left the production without its biggest selling point. At the same time, the Salkinds realized the budget was spiraling out of control. Some estimates projected costs approaching $200 million, an impossible figure for the time. Instead, they only had $30 million to work with, so the script had to be slashed even further. But those early setbacks were just a warm-up for a chaotic shoot. O'Toole was dealing with personal issues tied to his addictions, while Faye Dunaway was constantly fighting with director Gino Swark and mistreating the crew. And caught right in the middle was Slater, doing the best she could to carry a movie that was completely off the rails. But the final blow came during test screenings. The first cut clocked in at 138 minutes and was rejected by the audience, who complained about the runtime and Superman's absence. Warner ordered them to cut over half an hour, though they ultimately ended up selling the rights to TriStar Pictures. When Supergirl premiered in the United States on November 21, 1984, it was an absolute disaster. It grossed just $14 million and got torn apart by the press. Everyone pointed out that the plot made zero sense and criticized the performances, especially Slater's. She went from being Hollywood's next big star to carrying the weight of a massive flop. It definitely hurt her career, although she managed to keep acting and never turned her back on the experience. In fact, she would actually return to that universe a few more times, but let's not get ahead of ourselves. Over the years, Supergirl eventually won over fans thanks to TV reruns and home video, but the damage was already done. Kara became a problem character for Hollywood, and her failure helped cement the idea that female superheroes couldn't carry big-budget movies. On top of that, rumors started spreading about a curse attached to Superman and his universe, one capable of ruining careers and even entire lives. The most shocking case was Reeve. After the failure of the fourth Superman movie, a tragic accident left him quadriplegic. But getting back to Supergirl, the most unsettling part of it all was that the movie's disaster seemed to be just the start of a long streak of bad luck that would follow the character right up to the present day. After her flop in the 80s, Supergirl vanished from the big screen, but Hollywood never completely let the character go. For decades, she kept popping up in animated projects and video games, though always as a supporting player within the Superman universe. It wouldn't be until many years later that she'd get another shot at live action, but this time on television. Her first big return was in Smallville, the series about Clark Kent's younger years. This time, Kara was played by Laura Vandervoort, an up-and-coming Canadian actress. She made her debut in the 7th season in 2007, and fans immediately embraced her. This allowed her to stick around as a recurring character until the show ended. But even with all that going for her, Supergirl was still stuck in her usual role. She was just a piece of a much larger story, not someone who could carry a massive hit all on her own. And interestingly enough, Smallville also brought back the Supergirl from the 80s. Helen Slater guest starred as Kara-El, Superman's biological mother. But Warner still wanted to take a chance on Kara Zor-El, and their real gamble came when DC started building the Arrowverse, a shared TV universe that took off thanks to the success of Arrow and The Flash. The studio saw the perfect opportunity to finally give Supergirl her very own show. For this new take on the superhero, the production cast Melissa Benoist, who was coming off a breakout run on Glee. In this version, Kara is sent to Earth to protect Jor-El, but she ends up arriving years late and gets adopted by the Danvers family. Now, going by Kara Danvers, she has to balance her everyday life with her crime-fighting side. By the way, her adoptive mother is played by Helen Slater. It's almost as if Hollywood just couldn't completely let go of that old misfire. At first, Supergirl actually seemed to be working, airing on CBS. The first episode premiered on October 26, 2015, and pulled in 12.96 million viewers, a massive number for any modern TV show. Benoist won instant praise, and a lot of people thought we had finally gotten the definitive version of the character. However, the cost per episode was just too high for the ratings it was bringing in, so CBS tried to cancel it. The producers managed to rescue the show by moving it over to the CW, a smaller network geared toward a younger demographic. It hung on there with modest ratings and a loyal fan base, but it also had to survive on a much tighter budget. That took a toll on the writing and the visual effects, forcing Kara to go up against cheap-looking threats and repetitive storylines. Behind the scenes, the actress was also dealing with domestic violence from her ex-partner, a turbulent chapter of her life that she had to navigate while the show itself was going downhill. The Supergirl series ran for 6 seasons with a total of 126 episodes, a pretty respectable run, but it never managed to become a massive cultural phenomenon. It never generated the kind of buzz that other shows from that era did, like Game of Thrones or Stranger Things. Let's be real, it was irrelevant. Melissa was consistently praised as the best part of the show, but even she couldn't elevate it above mediocrity. She didn't have much luck after the series was canceled either. She popped up in a few movies and starred in shows that barely lasted a single season. By then, the Superman curse was practically treated as a fact online, and Supergirl was known more for being just another link in that chain than for anything she actually did on screen. And the worst part is, Hollywood's next attempt was going to be even more troubled than anything we've seen so far. After years of bad luck, Supergirl was set to return to the big screen in one of DC's most ambitious movies. But the project was born right in the middle of a cinematic universe that was already falling apart. That's right. To really understand this nightmare, we have to explore the DC Extended Universe. It kicked off in 2013 with Zack Snyder's Man of Steel. Warner dreamed of building their own answer to Marvel's success and planned a massive universe of interconnected movies. But while Snyder's vision had a passionate fan base, it also divided audiences and caused constant tension within the studio. Warner wanted lighter, more accessible movies, while the director insisted on a dark and somber approach. Eventually, Snyder walked away, and Henry Cavill, the Superman of this whole initiative, started getting sidelined. Right at the height of this crisis, producer Walter Hamada stepped in with a new plan. partially reboot the DC Extended Universe, and replace Cavill's Superman with Supergirl. They were so committed to this strategy that in 2018, they announced a standalone movie and even locked in Oren Uziel as the writer. But before getting her own project, the character was set to appear in the movie designed to reset the entire franchise, The Flash, starring Ezra Miller and directed by Argentine filmmaker Andy Muschietti. DC desperately needed The Flash to succeed after everything that happened with Snyder, and they bet big on three main ideas: introducing the multiverse, bringing back classic versions of characters, and completely resetting the studio's continuity. But the biggest addition was the new Supergirl. After auditioning hundreds of actresses, Muschietti chose Sasha Calle, an American actress of Colombian descent, which instantly sparked controversy. Fans criticized the casting, pointing out that the comic book Kara was white, blonde, and blue-eyed. Muschietti and Warner were accused of pushing a woke agenda, but nothing changed their minds. The director stated he chose her because she had a mix of toughness and vulnerability, which was exactly what he wanted for the character. He also wanted to pay tribute to Helen Slater's original performance. During the film's climax, the 80s Kara appears right alongside Reeves' Superman. But the backlash was only just beginning. Filming for The Flash took place between April and October 2021, and the first photos of the superhero made die-hard fans even more furious. Kara was no longer wearing her traditional outfit, sporting a suit much closer to Cavill's Superman instead. Because of this, some of Snyder's most radical fans started attacking Sasha Calle on social media, accusing her of replacing the Man of Steel. Despite the protests, Sasha was thrilled. She had signed a multi-picture deal and hoped her performance would convince Hollywood to cast more Latina actresses in iconic roles. She had no idea the worst was yet to come. The first major problem for The Flash wasn't creative, it was corporate. In April 2022, the merger between Warner Media and Discovery was finalized, and the new executives started reviewing all of DC's productions. The movie's release was pushed back from November 4th of that year to June 23rd, 2023. On top of that, in November 2022, Hamada was ousted and DC Studios was formed, a new division led by producer Peter Safran and director James Gunn, who was fresh off his success at Marvel with Guardians of the Galaxy. The two of them were handed total control over film and television productions, and their very first move was to cancel projects that were already in development. The Flash would still be released, but it felt more like a contractual obligation than the start of a new era. And right as the studio was navigating this internal chaos, the Flash himself got caught up in the scandals we all know about. Miller exhibited highly erratic behavior, including physical altercations and criminal conduct. With the actor in the eye of the storm, Warner Brothers decided they wouldn't be part of the promotional tour. Since the main star couldn't do press, the spotlight fell on Muschietti and the rest of the cast. Sasha wanted to talk about her take on Supergirl and what it meant for the Latino community, but she was mostly just asked about Miller. Once again, the character's bad luck seemed to overshadow everything else. Because of this perfect storm of problems, The Flash became one of the biggest failures in DC history. Calle ended up being one of the few bright spots praised by both critics and fans. Many even acknowledged that she was just collateral damage in a project that was doomed from the start. Still, that was cold comfort for the actress. The change in leadership killed the standalone Supergirl movie, along with her contracts for other projects. By that point, the media and the fans were talking about the Superman curse more than ever. Even so, none of that stopped Warner and DC Studios, who moved forward with a new version of the Man of Steel and his cousin. But if you think things got better from there, you're dead wrong. After decades of failed attempts, Supergirl was finally getting another shot at the big screen. But once again, they ran into issues. This time, in theory, everything was set up to work. Gunn promised to rebuild a cinematic universe from scratch that had been trapped in chaos for years. The movie that would kick off this new era was Superman, which would also be the official start of a broader plan the director dubbed Gods and Monsters. Part of that strategy was a standalone Supergirl movie. Expectations shot up in January 2024 when it was announced that the superhero would be played by Millie Alcock. The Australian native had just stunned audiences in the series House of the Dragon, and the press considered her a rising star. Due to the sudden massive exposure she faced playing a Targaryen, she even said she wouldn't join another major franchise. But after a year without work, she accepted the offer from Gunn, who saw her as the perfect fit for a more rebellious, impulsive, and emotional version of Kara. Alcock admitted in interviews that she was afraid of potential online hate, but at least at first, the reactions were pretty positive. After the controversy surrounding Sasha Calle, many fans celebrated that this new Supergirl looked more like the classic comic book version. To make Alcock's debut as Supergirl a real event, Gunn decided to introduce her first in the post-credits scene of Superman. Her cameo was filmed in secret, using closed sets and screens to prevent any leaks. In the scene, Kara arrives at the Fortress of Solitude just to look for her dog, Crypto. She comes off as antisocial and unkempt, preferring to go party on other planets. Gunn's intention was clear. Superman would represent classic idealism, while Supergirl would be much more unpredictable. The problem was that Superman didn't just need to please the fans. It had to be a massive hit capable of saving Warner Bros. Discovery, a company battered by years of mergers, internal restructuring, and nearly $50 billion in debt. The studio's financial situation was so fragile that many analysts considered this reboot a desperate gamble. On top of that, the movie ended up costing over $250 million, and that's not even counting the marketing campaign. To justify that kind of investment, it needed to pull in astronomical numbers at the box office. And when Superman hit theaters on June 11, 2025, the turnout was far from the massive hit Warner was hoping for. It grossed around $619 million worldwide, a solid number for a normal production, but nowhere near enough given the massive budget and sky-high expectations surrounding the project. Critics and fans praised the cast, including Alcock's brief cameo. Still, a huge chunk of the general audience seemed to be suffering from growing superhero fatigue. After so many reboots, shared universes, and broken promises, a lot of people just couldn't get excited anymore. But as if that wasn't enough, Warner remained stuck in a state of corporate uncertainty. Their financial situation got even worse, to the point where they were bought out by Paramount. Once again, the Superman universe felt like it was built on extremely shaky ground. In the middle of all this doom and gloom, Supergirl kept moving forward with her solo movie. But the feeling was unavoidable. Even before cameras started rolling, the project was already carrying that same old curse. After a failed 80s movie, a TV show that didn't leave much of a mark, and some questionable on-screen appearances, Supergirl finally seems to have her ultimate shot at finding a place on the big screen. But even before it hits theaters, her new movie is already surrounded by doubts. Gunn bet heavily on the project. He brought on screenwriter Ana Nogueira to adapt Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow, widely considered the character's most mature comic book run. In this storyline, Kara sets out on a revenge mission against Krem, a space pirate who hurt her dog, Crypto. Directing duties were handed to Craig Gillespie, who had a track record of making movies about strong, complex women, like I, Tonya and Cruella. The tone promised to be more emotional and wild than any previous adaptation. In interviews, Alcock constantly talked about how thrilled she was with the film. On top of that, she would be sharing the screen with Corenswet, returning as Superman, and Jason Momoa, playing the classic DC anti-hero, Lobo. Interest in Supergirl skyrocketed in March 2026, when DC released the first official trailer. In less than 3 minutes, it showcases her as a true anti-heroine, capable of taking on the nastiest thugs, but also incredibly vulnerable when it comes to the people she loves. A lot of fans were fascinated by this approach, comparing the trailer's energy to Guardians of the Galaxy. Others pointed out Lobo's presence and felt confident that Alcock could easily carry an entire movie. But once again, the excitement was met with controversy as non-stop attacks against Alcock started flooding social media. Some users complained that Hollywood was deliberately making female superheroes look less attractive, while others shared screenshots from the trailer to mock her physical appearance. Memes also popped up maliciously comparing her to actor Will Poulter, and plenty of fans were even more direct, arguing that Alcock should have never been cast as Supergirl in the first place. The backlash against the actress intensified following a Vanity Fair interview. When asked about the level of exposure that comes with being in such massive franchises, she responded, "Just existing as a woman in that space is already grounds for criticism. People feel very comfortable exerting this weird sense of ownership over women's bodies. I can't stop it." Those comments infuriated the haters, who accused her of making excuses to justify an impending flop. Many even compared her to Rachel Zegler, who faced controversy after controversy leading up to the release of Snow White, with statements that many believed were just cries for attention to boost the film's performance. Far from staying quiet, Alcock stated in another interview that the attacks were coming from anonymous accounts or profiles of men whose bios read, "Father of 4, Christian." This sparked fresh outrage from Christian media outlets and groups. As the online debates grew, doubts also began to surface within Hollywood. Forbes, the prestigious business and financial publication, predicted that Supergirl would be the new DCU's first big failure. According to the article, the character doesn't seem to have a clear direction. The villain is completely unknown to the general public, and Gillespie isn't a director who guarantees a box office hit. Questions even arose about whether Gunn's oversight would be enough to sustain another franchise, or if he is actually the one responsible for the entire decline. At this point, we can go back to the beginning of the video. Why does Supergirl seem doomed? The answer might lie in her roots. The character was created in 1959 by writer Otto Binder and artist Al Plastino as an occasional sidekick for Superman. Even though she eventually got her own storylines and a much more tragic side than her cousin, she never completely stopped living in his shadow. Unlike Kal-El, who was sent to Earth as a baby and raised with love by the Kents, Kara was a little girl when her people were wiped out. The memory of that loss would haunt her forever, making her a harder, rougher figure, a survivor of a world that no longer exists. Maybe that's the real conflict right there. When Hollywood tries to make Supergirl too lighthearted, the character loses her depth and just feels like a female copy of Superman. But when they try to make her darker, more rebellious, or violent, a chunk of the audience loses interest. After decades of stories, movies, shows, and reboots, the industry still doesn't seem to have found the right balance. So the problem isn't about one actress, one studio, or one specific movie anymore. The problem is that every new adaptation stumbles over the exact same question. What is Supergirl really supposed to be? That lack of certainty fuels a feeling that's getting harder and harder to ignore. The idea that Supergirl is simply cursed. It's worth mentioning that she had a brief stint in animation, appearing in Superhero High, which focused on the school life of DC's heroines, and Legion of Superheroes, where Supergirl is sent to the 31st century to train at the Legion Academy. Did any of you know about these releases? Before researching for this video, I didn't either. Supergirl has always been a part of pop culture, but her on-screen adaptations have forced her to face the ultimate villain, Hollywood. Every attempt to get her off the ground has crashed into failed movies, shows that never quite took off, and aimless cinematic universes. Her upcoming standalone film, with James Gunn at the helm, looks like it might finally do the superhero justice. But it's best to be cautious. If the Superman universe has taught us anything, it's that things can always go wrong. What do you think? Will the new Supergirl movie finally break the curse? Or will it just be another failed attempt? Let me know in the comments. Toy Story shouldn't have survived its own ambition, and maybe today, that's exactly the problem with its fifth movie.